Let's start with the president, shall we? Earlier today, President Biden addressing the nation. This is an attempt to reassure Americans amid this collapse. Let's take a listen.
First, all customers who had deposits in these banks can rest assured, rest assured they'll be protected and they'll have access to their money as of today. No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Let me repeat that. No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Instead, the money will come from the fees that banks pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund. Second, the management of these banks will be fired. If the bank is taken over by FDIC, the people running the bank should not work there anymore. Third, investors in the banks will not be protected. They knowingly took a risk, and when the risk didn't pay off, investors lose their money. That's how capitalism works. And fourth, there are important questions of how these banks got into the circumstance in the first place. We must get the full accounting of what happened and why those responsible can be held accountable.
On the third point that he makes with respect to whether or not whether or not investors should be protected by the taxpayer, I think he's absolutely correct, and I'm glad to see that the rescue effort does not include equity investors or indeed bondholders. I think that would certainly create a moral hazard in this situation, and one that the taxpayer just isn't likely to sort of support, particularly when you look at it through the prism of the 2008 financial crisis. What he said about taxpayer funding remains to be seen. I don't think there's any fully guarantee promise just yet that the taxpayer isn't going to be involved, simply because the rescue is only focused on 2 institutions right now, and that number could accelerate in the coming days. And by that time, fees paid into the FDIC may simply not be able to bear the weight of depositor guarantees. So the president may rue that statement going forward. Time will tell. One thing he did say, though, JD, that I think deserves a bit of scrutiny is the idea that bank management is going to be fired immediately after an FDIC takeover. While that may sound good as a political soundbite, what the president and others have to remember is that any senior executive in a bank that is facing balance sheet difficulty is going to be reluctant to admit so, because he or she would find their job at risk as a result of being rescued. That really only creates or engenders the risk-taking that led to the situation we saw at SVB in the first place. So I don't think that's a particularly sound policy, and it's one that actually could create more trouble than it's worth.